Welcome to this edition of Onshore Connect. I'm your host, Heather Rosenbaum. Eagle Ford rig count has dropped more than 60% since commodity prices turned down in late 2014. Despite the pullback, the Eagle Ford has held up better than most other U.S. unconventional basins. The reason can be found in the high quality of rock in the reservoir, a proximity to the Gulf Coast petrochemical complex, and rapid technological improvement in well completions. Hart Energy's Onshore Connect sat down with two industry analysts who share insight on the Eagle Ford's competitive advantage and interviewed a big data expert on how evolving completion practices are improving oil and gas recovery.
The reality is that the Eagle Ford has held up pretty well on a relative basis. If you look at it compared to other plays that are more compromised, it looks like a top performer. If you compare it to its own history and overall performance, it's been more challenging. Notwithstanding the fact that rig counts are down almost 60%, volumes are actually flat to slightly up because of the advent of new drilling and completion techniques, and the fact that while there's plant capacity and some pipeline capacity in South Texas right now, there are also new pipelines that are going to access new markets, improving pricing, and hopefully creating a virtuous circle between producer activity and volumes through pipe. I think there's a huge opportunity around NGLs in general. I believe that the petrochem complex will continue to be on the Gulf Coast, and I believe that connecting Eagle Ford supply with those new end markets will be huge. I also think propane export is here to stay with the expansion of the Panama Canal and the value of propane in other markets. I think you're going to see more propane egress from the Gulf Coast. Look, I think price will ramp at slightly improved prices. But for activity to be healthy, I think you need $55 to $60 oil, and I'd like to see gas closer to $3.
So Eagle Ford's interesting. It's a low-cost basin and responsible for a lot of the oil growth that we've seen over the last 5 years. But it's a very young basin relative to other parts of the country. Now that seems like a kind of unimportant nuance, but what it means is that there's not a whole lot of legacy production to provide a kind of a cushion or a floor level of production. So you're exposed to early first, second, third year declines on these relatively high declining shale wells. So we're seeing Eagle Ford volumes roll pretty hard in relation to the downturn in activity. It's a good basin. It will come back. We actually think it's the growthiest basin in the U.S. over the next 5 years on a go-forward basis. Remember, that's predicated on a relatively bullish oil view for the commodity price, but we expect it to grow quickly. There's good infrastructure in the basin, so it's not necessarily infrastructure constrained, but because of that lack of legacy production, the declines are much steeper than you would probably expect to see. And I think midstream in particular, if it hasn't been surprised, will be surprised at how quickly volumes ramp down. That's the bad news. The good news is that they can also ramp up very quickly.
Bigger is not always better. So a lot of the clients that we worked with initially that were using that sort of 100-foot window as a drilling target, thought that they could make it up with a big frac later. And a lot of the analysis that we were reading had to do with maximizing stimulated rock volume. But as we were looking at identifying the near wellbore geologic variables that were most descriptive of production, the machine was telling us some different things about completions as well. It was recommending that we shorten stages, increase the cluster density, follow that up with more sand. And so what we found was that we were getting better results when we were focusing on quality rather than size. So by quality, I mean complexity. More fracture initiation points leading to a more complex fracture network in the near wellbore environment and connecting that up with more sand. And so focusing on quality there produced better results. I can tell you with some specificity, we'll use LaSalle County as an example. Working with a few different operators in LaSalle County, the combination of more mindful, precise wellbore targeting and a smaller, more complex fractures have produced an 8.7% uplift in the previous 2 quarters. So that's measurable, that's significant, and that is the result of implementing a recommendation that came out of a machine and seeing better results. I don't believe that we're anywhere near what's possible, but that is a tangible real-world experience that is presently being produced. We might not have found the limit on vertical and horizontal spacing. If we're looking at optimizing the net present value of a field, we might end up investing in putting more wells in and more of those near wellbore complex completion jobs. It might end up ultimately putting more wells per section, but ultimately leading to a better value per section.
We also spoke with the analysts at Navport about trends in the Eagle Ford. Let's listen in.
2015 was really a reactive year for most operators as they were adjusting to the downward oil market reaching the 11-year low. We see 2016 being more of a proactive year as operators are more strategic in adjusting to the new norm of the market. Looking specifically at the Eagle Ford, we've actually seen an uplift in recent months, shedding positive light on the market. Looking at August over the low point in May, we've seen a 40% uplift, which we haven't seen in any other basins. If you look at other major basins, looking at the Permian, we've seen a 13% decline. We've seen a 14% decline in the Northeast. We've seen a 12% decline in the Bakken in recent months, while Eagle Ford has shown some growth. Despite 2015 being a rough year, with success stories being hard to come by, several operators have managed to still show growth and rebound in recent months in the Eagle Ford. Specific operators including Anadarko, Marathon, and BHP all have shown increases of more than 22% in Q3 2015 over Q2. BHP actually increased completions by more than 160% during the same time period. Pioneer Resources has shown some pretty interesting trends, remaining relatively flat and unaffected by the market downturn for the majority of 2015, and recently showing some increases. Aside from these major players, smaller operators in the Eagle Ford, like Encana Oil and Gas, have proven to hold on during this downward market, increasing their completion volumes, averaging about 22 completions per quarter in 2015, up from only an average of 11 at the end of year 2014. Regardless of what current data provider anyone's using, we expect that when the market does eventually rebound, that we're hopeful that the trend towards big data usage continues, just because of the transparency that it sheds light onto not only how you're completing the wells, what the production it's producing, what's actually going downhole, all of the specifics, so you can see not only what you're doing, but what your competitors are doing. With that amount of data available, I don't see why anyone would revert back to the old methods that they've used in the past.
This concludes this edition of Onshore Connect. We want to take a moment to thank you, the viewer, and our sponsor for making this program possible. Until next time, let's stay connected.